Great. Obligatory thanks to the sponsors, but moving on. Hi, folks. I'm Danny Maertens. I'm a product manager at Microsoft. I'm on the PowerShell team. I kind of sit off to the side of the other PowerShell PMs, and I mainly focus on Azure PowerShell, Azure Cloud Shell. Wow, don't want to take credit from Damien, as well as our SSH projects, which would be Win32-OpenSSH, Azure SSH, kind of as an all-up bucket, and then specifically SSH access to Arc-enabled servers. So what are we going to talk about today? So first, we're going to go over our key investment areas. We're going to look at some things with Yubikeys and PKCS11 and just general security things with Windows, as well as going over SSH access to Arc-enabled servers. And don't worry if you're not familiar with really Azure or Arc. We'll go over a brief overview when we get there and do a full demo as well. Okay, so what are our kind of key areas of investment? So historically, and I guess we should start with why invest in SSH all up to begin with, right? And so really it's about a consistent and secure remoting platform across both Linux and Windows. And historically, there hasn't been a ton of SSH support in Windows, where it's been the main remoting protocol on the Linux side. And so this is one of the things that, Linux got right. Unix systems, and this is something that we can adopt and bring into the Windows platform to make a consistent management experience kind of across both Windows and the Unix systems. Historically, our main focus of the team has been Win32-OpenSSH, and this is the continued upstream work from the OpenSSH project from the OpenBSD Foundation, and that's also with getting SSH as a first-class citizen in Windows. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. And then our next area of investment is SSH connectivity to Azure and Arc. And so this looks like, how do we make a common and consistent remoting experience for really everywhere that's in the remoting ecosystem within Azure and Arc, and make the SSH connectivity experience kind of the simplest as we can make it for all customers. There's a few things that go along with that. There's the Win32-OpenSSH VM extension. So this currently allows you to install Win32-OpenSSH onto older versions of Windows where we don't necessarily support it in box, but we can support OpenSSH via the VM extension to do the install. This also includes, I'd say, future updates for configuration. And so, yes, we can give you OpenSSH, but at that point, you're responsible to go and set it all up. In an ideal world, you can deploy the OpenSSH extension, and that would either install OpenSSH if you needed to, enable SSH, and then you'd be able to supply an SSH config to go and set that machine up as desired. There's also the SSH access to Azure Arc-enabled servers, which we'll talk about a little bit more in depth a little later, as well as the unified SSH experience for Azure. So jumping into specifically Win32-OpenSSH, what are we really working on a day-to-day? And so we're looking at really transitioning server workloads to SSH and PowerShell remoting. And the big reason for that is that for server workloads, a lot of customers and a lot of folks are going and RDPing into their servers. And that's great. And if you require a GUI or you want a GUI, that's fine. We encourage folks to move over to Windows Admin Center. But the real reason for this is around security. And with the security that SSH and SSH remoting and PowerShell remoting over SSH, and really Windows Admin Center offers as well, is that you can go and audit the PowerShell commands that are run, the SSH connections that were made, and you really can't audit an RDP session. You can't audit mouse clicks. And so we're looking at how can we set up Win32 as really being the most secure form of connection and remoting that we offer kind of in the Windows space. And so that goes into things like Yubikey, YubiKeys and hardware two-factor auth support, and as well as other security features like GIA in the future, as well as potential integration with the Microsoft Authenticator app, Windows Hello, and just all of the, I'd say, native security features that we offer within Windows. Okay, and unfortunately, and the demo gods were not in my favor today. I wanted to show a Yubikey demo, but my computer forced an update right before this, and that's why I was kind of late to getting on stage. And so it actually broke my Yubikey demo. But the Yubikey and two-factor hardware support is available in our latest beta release. And so if you go and install our 8.9.1 release, I think anything newer than 8.6, we have support for hardware keys and two-factor auth support. And so that is not what ships by default on Windows currently. That will ship later this year or early next year, whenever I'd say the next major Windows update rolls out. And then that will be default inbox as well. In the meantime, if you want to set that up and play with it, you can install it from our GitHub beta releases. Okay, moving on to the bulk of what we'll talk about here as SSH access to Arc-enabled servers. And again, bear with me if you're not an Arc customer or an Azure customer. I will give a little bit of background. And don't worry that this is a quote-unquote paid solution, because everything I'm showing today is free. Okay, so what does this Shark provide? And so Shark provides SSH access to your Arc-enabled servers, obviously. But what does that actually look like? So for those of you that aren't familiar with Arc, Arc is kind of this umbrella term within Azure that essentially means you have the Azure management plane and you want to bring that into a non-Azure piece of hardware. And so that could be your on-premise servers, that could be your desktop that's sitting next to you, that could be a server that's running in a different cloud provider. And the goal is to bring the Azure management plane onto that resource, and so that you can manage it in a way that is, I'd say, consistent across both Azure and your non-Azure resources. And so specifically, Arc-enabled servers is Arc for servers. But the key feature here is that we can provide this access without a public IP address or inbound ports required. And so this is really huge, because now you can deploy Arc onto really any machine, and you can get access to that machine without having any public inbound ports or a public IP address. And so you don't have to worry about opening up this functionality on your desktop, for example. And some of the fun scenarios that I've set up with this is, oh, maybe I want to get onto a Raspberry Pi or that I have sitting on my desk, and I also have my desktop sitting here. And normally it's hard to get into a Raspberry Pi without opening it up to a public-facing internet port. But because I have SSH set up on my Arc-enabled server, i.e. my desktop, I can use SSH tunneling to get into my Raspberry Pi from any machine where I can log in with an Azure account. Okay, so moving on, we support multiple forms of auth. We support all local user logins with key-based auth or username and password. And so this would honor your existing auth and user accounts that you have set up. And so if you already have user accounts provisioned for all the users that use your servers, you don't have to create new accounts to use this. They can use their existing keys or existing username and password to be able to auth into their machine. Additionally, we support AD identity-based auth. And so if you log in as, let's just say, Danny@Microsoft.com, when I connect to that machine, I'll log in as Danny@Microsoft.com at, I'd say, my server. Currently, this is only supported for Linux. Windows support is coming soon. And if you're some of the users might be familiar with the AAD login for Linux experience with Azure, and that's the exact same functionality, and we've just partnered with them to, I'd say, expand on that functionality. And I'd say the last but not least is this. Obviously, we require you use Azure CLI or Azure PowerShell to access these machines. But we know that in the SSH space, SSH tooling is a big part of the ecosystem. There's things like SFTP, Ansible, all these other all these other tools that use native SSH to be able to do management. And we didn't really want to break any of the scenarios. And so if you have existing scripts that are written with some of those native SSH tools, you can create an SSH config file with Azure CLI or Azure PowerShell and supply that config file to any other OpenSSH-based tooling, and you'll still be able to access your machines without that public IP address. And so let's say you're trying to do a file transfer and you don't have access to that machine, and there's not really a great solution that you have deployed for file transfers. You can now SSH into that machine without exposing it to the internet and still use your native SFTP or SCP. Okay, so lots of talk. Let's kind of see it in action. So let me pull up my PowerShell prompts. Okay, so let me make this a bit bigger so y'all can see. Okay, so all I've done here so far is my Connect AZ account and a set AZ context for my specific subscription. And so now, if I want to look at, let's just say my Arc enabled servers that I have, I can do like a get AZ connect to machine. We'll just say resource group. Sure. Actually, let's just do start demo. And we'll see if we go. A little slow today. Oh man, star demo won't work. Okay, we'll have to talk to them. We'll do win demo. Here we go. So here you can see I have a Windows machine that has that I've onboarded into Arc. You can also see that I have a Linux machine here as well. And so just for consistency, we'll show connecting to both of those, and then we'll go into kind of each of the individual functionalities that we have. And so if I want to connect to this machine, we can say enter AZVM. And this is actually an existing commandlet that has, I'd say, shipped as part of a preview module, specifically and only in CloudShell. But that was, I'd say, abandoned by the team that gave us that module long ago. And so this is us replacing that functionality, rebuilding into this existing commandlet, and I'd say recommitting to making sure that these connection scenarios work. So we can supply a resource group name. In this case, I'm just going to say, let's say, we'll connect to my Linux machine first. I provide the name of my Linux resource. Here, actually, I'm going to zoom out a little bit more so it's easier for folks to see everything I have on screen. Is that still readable for folks? I'll assume someone will yell at me if not. Okay. And so now I can also specify a local user, and the local user I'm going to log in is Danny. And so if I connect to this machine, I've done no additional setup for this machine. I've already had these keys set up, and boom, I'm directly into my Linux machine that is not public facing, purely with an already provisioned SSH key. So here you can see I'm on my machine as Danny at my Linux machine. I talked about the AAD auth as well. Here, let me jump back. And if I want to use an AAD auth, all I have to do is remove my local user. You're saying, hey, I don't want to log in as Danny or user that already exists on this machine. I want to connect as my identity. And so when I did that connect AZ account, I auth as, we'll say, my alias at Microsoft.com. And so right now, the Azure PowerShell knows who I am. It can go and auth me with AAD. And so if I execute this command, it might take a second longer because we have, I'd say, another auth hop, but it's still really quick. I'm, again, already on my machine with auth as, I'd say, my alias at Microsoft.com at my Linux machine. Okay. And so we'll exit from here. And so for those of you who are familiar, there's already, let's rescale this window just so we stop getting that weird fall off at the bottom. So for those of you that are familiar, there's already the existing AZ SSH VM commands, which exist for Azure for Azure CLI. This enter AZ VM command is not publicly released yet. We're still in preview, but it'll be releasing, I think, in the next month. And that is, I'd say, the sister to the AZ SSH VM command. Okay, so now I've shown connecting to my Linux machines. What about my Windows machines? So if I just jump and take this same command here, we'll replace this back to my Windows machine and change this to Windows Server 22. I'm specifying here my resource type. I realize I didn't talk about this because I have an Azure machine with the same name. And so here I have a machine that's an Azure VM that's called Windows Server 22. And I also have this Arc machine that's called Windows Server 22. And so I need to specify that I want to connect to my hybrid resource, which is my Arc machine. And so here I can also specify my local user. And again, here I have just set up with username and password. And again, I'm on the machine right away as my local user. Okay, so there's a few other, I'd say, kind of nice features along with this. I realized that earlier I touched on that we want to start transitioning folks away from RDP into SSH remoting. I fully understand that some folks might have workloads where hey, I'm used to a GUI or I want a GUI, right? And in that case, really RDP is the only way you can get there. But that doesn't mean that you need to still have the RDP ports open. And so if I jump over to Azure CLI here, I can say AZ SSH Arc, supply my resource group name, thank you Predictive Intelligence, as well as my resource group, a VM name, local user. We also have this -- RDP parameter. And so because this is just, I say, an SSH remote session, I can do port forwarding. And so what this parameter does is it opens up, I'd say, it sets up SSH tunneling on the remote server to say, hey, on port 22, even though port 22 isn't publicly exposed, I want to treat that as, I'd say, my RDP session on 3389. And then on my local machine, it's going to set up that same port forwarding, but just from a local host that's not currently in use. And so if I execute this command, it's going to set up the SSH tunnel. It's going to open up the RDP client, and here I'll have to auth to my machine for my SSH tunnel. And if it might open on another screen, so bear with me. Yep, it did. So let me drag this over. So I get my, I'd say, prompt. I'm sorry if this is a little small, but bear with me. I'll re-auth to my RDP remoting session. And it opened on my other screen again, so give me one more second. Oh, there we go. So now you can see I'm connected to a local host port on my, I'd say, client machine. And my server is slowly loading. Oh, here we go. There we go. So now, without having, I'd say, RDP ports open at all, or even, I'd say, exposed, and only having this set up with SSH on my remote server, I can get an SSH session that opens an RDP session. And so you're not at a state where you have to have RDP exposed at all. If you're on a machine that you do still want a public IP address and you want SSH just exposed, great. Keep SSH exposed. Don't expose RDP is one less port to show, but just use a SSH tunneling to set up the RDP session. And again, this is to an Arc machine that does not have a public-facing IP address or public-facing ports. So I can easily close this session, and this session will close. So I also talked about using your native SSH tooling, right? And so what does that experience look like? And so here we have the, let's just look at the module. So if we say git command on the module az.ssh, you can see we have two commands here. We have the enter azvm command I showed earlier, as well as this export az.ssh config. So if I say export, I'm just going to take my predictive IntelliSense again, az.ssh config, my resource group name. So again, for this Windows machine, the name of my server. Again, specifying it's an Arc machine, my local user, and then specifying this SSH config file path. And so here I'm just going to create, I'd say, some temp config file. So I run this. Oops. Is denied. Okay, let's try that again. C:/ desktop temp.config. Oops, good enough. Great. So now I've created this temp config file. So if I want to go and use this config file, what does that look like, right? And so I can say, let's just say sftp, not that machine. I want to supply a config file. Here we're going to have to set this file path again accordingly. So what is this? We're talking : desktop temp.config. Great. And here you're going to want to specify your resource group of your machine. So here it's WinDemo. Specify the name. Whoops. We'll just do it all. WinDemo. Specify the name of your server. In this case, Win-server22. And then if you want to use AAD login, you just leave it there. If you want to connect as a local user, specify your local user here. So now I can go and say, I want to do an SFTP file transfer. I'm going to auth to this machine. And even though this machine still doesn't have that public IP address, I can connect to that machine and use any native SSH tooling that already exists. And so no need to rewrite your whole script to make this work. All you need to add is one parameter and I'd say modify the string that you want to connect to. Okay. All right, so great. Now with this, you can connect to really any machine. So any machine that can be onboarded as an Arc server, which I think is realistically any SKU of modern SKU of Windows or Unix system. So now I can connect to any of my machines without a public-facing internet port or IP address. But what if I'm not on my local machine? And so the nice thing is we also have Cloud Shell, right? And so here I'm in the Azure portal. I'm on a specific Arc-enabled server. Let me make this a little bit bigger. Here you can see I'm on that same Windows server. We're adding this little button here that says connect. And so this is, I'd say, mirroring a lot of the functionality that we already have on Azure IaaS machines. And so how do we want to enable that quick and easy connection? Well, we can say connect, and I'm going to auth with a password again. We'll just say my local user Danny again. And now we've added this little nifty option that says connect in browser. And what this does is it opens Cloud Shell. It's going to ask you if you want to, before it hijacks any existing open Cloud Shell window. But then it's going to execute this command you have here. And so you can see here I have that Azure CLI command that says, yep, I want to connect to this specific Arc machine and this subscription, and it's all the same parameters. You can see here Cloud Shell is opened. It's now, come on here, let's do this. It's now executed that command already on my behalf. And now I just need to specify, I don't know if I actually clicked on this. Let's try that again. Specify that same password, and I'm on that machine. And so now from any machine that you can, I'd say, get to a public exposed browser, so really any machine, you can connect to any of your other machines in a secure way. And so if I just exit back out of this. And so here you can see I can also do things with key-based auth. And if I wanted to connect to the machine, and I already had that key set up in Key Vault or supply that really is just a one-click connection directly to your machine. Okay, so jumping back, if I can find my PowerPoint slides. Okay. So I think that's all I had here. So just to end, we'll end on on Shark. The setup for this, I'd say, takes less than 5 minutes. You can go and it's really just one script that you run on your server to connect it to Arc. I think it's, I'd say, really 5 different commands. It connects it to Arc. Arc is free to onboard an Arc machine, so it's free to connect to that to onboard that machine. SSH Arc is a free offering. Right now, we're still in preview, but it's still a free offering. So you can connect to your machine without a public IP address from any machine that you can auth into Azure from or from a web browser, all securely, nothing exposed, keeping your existing username and passwords or user keys or using AAD auth and leveraging any of the existing scripts that you have that might already be SSH based. And so why expose a public IP address at all at this point? But yeah, now I'll open up to questions. And I still, there's some things in the chat. Okay, so Alan, I'd say early on, sorry I was not looking at the chat here. Azure AD support, I think I touched on that quite a bit. AAD support is supported for Linux machines. Windows is coming soon. That gets into the next question that's queued here. So when Windows support is coming, what will work? Will that work only for AAD joined machines, or also against those that are joined to an on-prem AD domain? Yeah, so actually this is something that I would love to get some feedback on. So this is something that's really up to the AAD folks and the Arc folks. We understand that a lot of folks who are using on-premise machines might be using I'd say just normal regular Active Directory, right? And obviously you can't join to both AD and AAD. And so we're actually exploring solutions for both. So for AD, that would just be, I'd say, a local user mapping. And so when I connect to the machine, it's just creating a user account that's just called, I'd say, danny@microsoft.com to connect. We're also exploring, again, the AAD option, where that is, I'd say, a true, I'd say, user, quote-unquote, AAD account on that machine and not local user mapping. So both of those are kind of open. But I would love, if any of you have, I'd say, strong or even weak opinions on this, shoot me a message. You can message me on Twitter. That will work fine, and I'll put my handle in the chat one more time. Okay. Let's see. So yeah, only on-prem, no Azure. Okay, great. So I think I answered that question. Any other questions? Say questions on general SSH, remoting, state of, I'd say, how we want folks to be remoting to servers versus clients. I'd say future of PowerShell remoting. Any questions there? Otherwise, I can keep sitting here and filling time with aimless talk. Okay. Well, if there's no questions, I'll take that on. Everything was super clear, so I'll leave it at that. I'll hang out here for the rest of the time, and if there are any questions that come up, feel free. Actually, I'll throw some links in the chat as well to how to kind of get started with both onboarding to Arc and setting up this functionality, and also throw links to our GitHub page and I'd say Windows docs as well to get you all set up. All right, links incoming. Yeah, so I just saw a question coming in the chat. Any timeline for GA for private endpoint support for all services required by the Arc agent when using closed networks? So no internet access, i.e. AAD and other dependencies, ARM, in addition to private endpoints for the Arc service itself. So I'm probably not the best person to answer that question. I'm happy to follow up on that. I just don't want to, I'd say, give you anything that's inaccurate. And so, as I mentioned before, I'm coming into the, I'd say, Arc space purely from the SSH point of view. And so I don't want to really comment on any of the private endpoints that Arc-enabled servers might require or might have plans for the future. But if you shoot me a message, I will happily follow up with the correct PMs there. So now in the chat we have links for both getting started with for Arc-enabled servers as well as enabling SSH Arc, which is the demo for today. And then also we have our GitHub page, which is just in the PowerShell repo, as well as our public docs. So okay. Yeah, so some words on the future of PowerShell remoting. So right now, and I think this is, I'd say, been stated a few times in the past. So historically, PowerShell remoting's been all over WinRM. WinRM is not getting any more active development. All remoting, I'd say, protocol efforts are on SSH. WinRM, I'd say, is the kind of the same state that I'd say Windows PowerShell is where it's getting servicing, but it's not getting feature updates. If there's a security issue, we're going to fix it, but there's going to be nothing new with it. And the way I kind of build the analogy around at least remoting is, for all of you all, you're familiar with PowerShell, right? So I'd say PowerShell 7x is equivalent of SSH, and Windows 5.1 is equivalent of WinRM, right? So all future PowerShell remoting efforts will be made over SSH, and that was viewed really as the primary remoting scenario currently and for the future. How will the updated SSH stack be deployed to Windows servers and clients? Yeah, so OpenSSH ships in box, and I'd say all modern SKUs of Windows. And so actually on my client machine here, I've done no additional setup. There's one error message that popped up just because I have a bunch of, I'd say, odd SSH configurations on my machine. But for, I'd say, a standard or a new user, SSH client is there by default on all Windows clients. And so if you just want to go and SSH to a machine, you can just type in SSH. It doesn't ship as part of PowerShell. It ships, I'd say, natively in Windows. if you want to install SSH client, or sorry, SSH client on a server SKU, or SSH server on a server SKU or a client SKU. Those are shipped as feature on demand. And so if you go in, you search optional features, and if you look at the documentation, I sent in the link as well. There's some info there as well. But it's just, I'd say, I think 1 or 2 line of PowerShell to enable it, or 1 click in a GUI to enable the functionality. And then that's how it's at least on box. For servicing, we're serviced through the standard Windows servicing pipeline. And so I'd say that normal, quote unquote, Patch Tuesday, things like that. That's the standard servicing for all, I'd say, feature on demands. We are looking at other ways of shipping, whether that be WinGet or something like that in the future. That's still kind of up in the air on any plans there, though. So right now we ship solely as a feature on demand. We do have our GitHub page, and that is, I'd say, unsupported releases, and that's only because those are our beta releases. And so the way our kind of shipping timeline works is really anytime there's large updates from the overall OpenSSH project from OpenBSD, we try to do a Win32-OpenSSH release as well. And so I think we're 1 version behind is generally what we are. And so I think they've released, I know they have released 9.0. Our latest release is 8.9. And that's just because it takes time for us to make all the changes to be able to let it natively work in Windows. So we release those updates as soon as we have them on GitHub. We usually let our releases, I'd say, bake on GitHub for a while. And so that way we have time to see if there are any, I'd say, major issues. Generally, that does not happen. I think in the past 5 years that I've worked on this, I think there's only been 1, maybe 2 times where we released a like .1 release as well. So it's a very stable project. And we let that bake, I'd say, on our GitHub beta release for a month or so, and then that's what we package into Windows. Because of the Windows, I'd say, timelines for shipping, a lot of times we have to have our bits in, I'd say, months and months before they actually get released. And that's just because Windows also does security testing of our bits for us later in the pipeline as well. And so that's kind of the whole process of going from original OpenSSH bits from OpenBSD all the way to shipping on GitHub and then inbox. Yeah, so let me look at this last question. Oh, this is the one I just answered. Yeah, so again, the SSH version inbox is out of date. And so if I look inbox, I think we are at 8.1, I think, for the latest SKUs. And that's just, I'd say, purely a function of the Windows shipping timelines. And I think Windows ships either every 6 months or yearly at this point. And so for those major releases, that's when we can ship an updated version of OpenSSH. And so I think you can expect each, I'd say, major update of Windows to have a newer version of OpenSSH. And that's one of the reasons we're exploring, say, WinGet, for example, where we have the ability to update, I'd say, more asynchronously outside of the standard Windows update timelines. I think we got another 5 minutes here for questions, so I will stick around if there's any other things that come up. I'm glad my answers are clear. I know that the SSH space can kind of be this bag of worms with, say, really deep and complex scenarios, but we wanted it, as much as it is as a scary bag of worms, it's a very useful bag of worms. And I'd say just because it's deep and dark in some sections doesn't mean it can't be accessible for, I'd say, a novice user. And so I'd say don't get, I'd say, some preconceived ideas that SSH might have these complex scenarios or all these strange port forwarding kind of situations, when really I'd say a baseline connection is really simple to get started with, and then you can add complexity or more options as time goes on and really update your configuration files as you desire. Yeah, so should we consider updating to the latest version now on 8.1? Any new features in 8.9? So yeah, so there's always going to be new features, and those, I'd say, the changes between, I'd say, the Win32-OpenSSH versions depend on kind of two things. There's, I'd say, all the upstream changes that we get from, I'd say, overall OpenSSH, and that's why one of our goals is kind of to finish upstreaming, so we don't have to have this, I'd say, secondary kind of Win32 hop as well. But you'll get all the features from the standard OpenSSH release. And then if there are any discrepancies that we've historically had, we try to pick off a few of those major ones as time goes on. And so one of the big ones, I'd say, recently has been, I'd say, GSS API, which really enables two-factor auth, right? And so the Yubikey, which unfortunately I wasn't able to show today, that's something that's, I'd say, currently only on our GitHub releases. That is not in the latest version of Windows. And that's just because there hasn't been a Windows release since when we've had those bits done. And so installing from GitHub will make sure that you always have the latest. The Windows kind of lags a little bit. And again, that's just due to the timelines of shipping a service or a product within, I'd say, the Windows ecosystem. So should you consider updating? I'd say up to you. I'd say the latest functionality and features is always going to be realistically on our GitHub first. And so if there's some functionality or feature you've been waiting for, two-factor auth has been a really big one. So I know a lot of folks who've moved to adopt our GitHub releases specifically for that, just because they want to be all off with their Yubikey. I mean, like I have mine sitting here that I use for half of my machines anyway. So if there is a feature that you desire or is enough of an incentive to make you use and go to the GitHub release, then great. If not, stick with the Windows one. The Windows one, I'd say, has full servicing. It has a dedicated support staff, and so I'd say there's benefits to each. Right? It's kind of the same with really any other preview release. Right? Do you want the LTS version, or do you want the preview release that might have newer features? All right, we got, I'd say, just another minute here. So if folks have any more questions, I'm always happy to chat offline. You can shoot me a message and we can cover something there. I think I'll answer this last question we have here, and then go from there. So, oh yeah, someone just posted the versions for me. So thank you, Alan. So yeah, so the Windows 11 H2, which I think was the update that just rolled out. That is the bits for 8.6. 8.1 is what a lot of folks probably have, and then we're currently on 8.9.1, and then we're actively working on our 9.x release as well. And then one more question that comes in, and then I'll call it because I think I'm at time here. And so if SSH is the future main entry point into all boxes, should you not try to separate the update frequency from the whole OS updates? Yeah, exactly. That's one of the things I was kind of mentioning, is we're exploring those other options like WinGet for, I'd say, a more asynchronous way to update the bits. And that's just something that we need. I'd say we don't want to reinvent the wheel and ship some new way of doing all these updates. We want to go and leverage something that already exists and that can be, it's a tool ambiguous. And so we just want to jump into an existing ecosystem, and WinGet is probably the best bet there. But that's something that we're certainly exploring. So let me finish your question. You do not have an emergency patch option, if I understand correctly. So I wouldn't say it's an emergency patch. We don't have an emergency patch because Windows servicing I'd say has the ability to do those emergency patches for security fixes and things like that. It's just there's different bars for in Windows Update. So with Windows Update, you can, if there's a security fix or something business critical, can you get it in? Absolutely. But can I get, I just say a general version change from, let's just say 8.6 to 8.9? That's a lot more difficult to get into Windows Update. Yeah, and I think that finished answering your question. Okay, so if there's any more questions or if you just want to chat SSH, feel free to reach out. You can message me on GitHub, or not GitHub, Twitter, or leave a comment or issue on GitHub. Thanks, folks. Enjoy the rest of I hope you enjoyed the talk and the overall summit.